It was a Friday morning, one of those rare ones where the world feels a little more generous. Sunlight filtered in through the tall windows of our Malibu mansion, spilling golden light across the marble floors. I could hear the faint hum of waves crashing against the rocks beyond our terrace. There was a kind of peace in the air, a deceptive peace, as I would soon find out. I had just finished brewing coffee and was still in my robe, hair tied up in a lazy bun, when I remembered Richard had left his phone charger in the back seat of his car again. It wasn't unusual. He was always rushing out, juggling conference calls, last-minute court filings, and meetings with clients who seemed to think the world revolved around them. I didn't mind doing little things for him. I had, after all, made peace with the fact that being the wife of a high-powered attorney meant accepting the crumbs of his attention and pretending they were enough. I walked outside, barefoot on the stone path, feeling the warmth of the early sun on my skin. His black Mercedes was parked slightly crooked in the driveway, a detail that would have annoyed him if I'd been the one driving. I opened the back door, expecting to grab the charger and return to my coffee. But instead, I saw a leather folder. It looked official, with gold trim and a discreet firm logo in the corner. I almost didn't open it. I wish I hadn't. But something, curiosity, instinct, maybe divine intervention, urged me to pick it up. It was heavier than I expected. I slid it open and saw my name, Julia Wayne. And beneath it, petitioner, Richard Wayne. Divorce petition. I blinked again, read it a third time. My mind struggled to process what my eyes were seeing. The words jumped out at me like venom. Irreconcilable differences. Division of marital assets. Primary residence to remain in petitioner's possession. He wanted the house. He wanted everything. And worst of all, he had already signed. The folder slipped from my fingers onto the seat. My chest tightened. My knees went weak, and I sat there right in the passenger seat, holding back tears I didn't yet understand. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was in shock. For 15 years I had stood beside him, through law school, through the first terrifying years of building his practice, through the long nights, the missed dinners, the canceled vacations, and the increasing emotional distance. I had believed in us, and he was going to end it with a folder on the back seat? I took a deep breath. Another. My hands were shaking, but my mind was beginning to clear. That was the moment I knew something had shifted. I wasn't going to crumble. Not today. Not like this. I put the folder back exactly where it had been, closed the car door, walked back into the house, and I smiled. If Richard wanted war, he'd get it, but not the kind he expected. Back inside the house, the silence felt different now. Heaviness hung in the air. I sat at the kitchen table, still in my robe, and stared out the window. The ocean was still beautiful, the breeze still gentle. But something in me had hardened. I opened my laptop. I didn't cry, not once. Crying would have meant I accepted it, his decision, his betrayal. No. I wasn't going to be blindsided and left broken. I wasn't going to let this man quietly erase me from a life we built together. He thought I was too soft, too trusting. He'd made a terrible mistake. I typed in a name I hadn't needed in years. David Sanders. David wasn't just any attorney. He was a fixer. We'd met once years ago, at a charity gala Richard dragged me to. David had been charming in that sleazy, too slick kind of way, but he was sharp, ruthless, and most importantly, he didn't like Richard. I called. Julia, he answered after the second ring. His voice was dry, clipped. Wow, it's been a while. Thought you were living the dream up on the cliff. I was, I replied flatly, until about 30 minutes ago. What happened? I found divorce papers in Richard's car. A pause. Well, he said carefully, that explains the call. I need to transfer the house, the mansion in Malibu. I want it out of his reach. David whistled low. That place is worth what, 10 mil? 12 last appraisal, I corrected. He was silent again, thinking. You want to move it under your name only? He asked. Yes. Today. Quietly. He Asked for some information, escrow details, purchase agreement copies, documents of incorporation. I had them all. I wasn't just the wife who smiled for the cameras. I had been involved. I had insisted on being present for every meeting. Richard had said it was cute that I wanted to be informed. That arrogance would be his downfall. David worked fast. I watched the digital trail unfold as he dug through property registries, transfer loopholes, asset shielding strategies. His messages pinged every few minutes. By noon he had found the opening we needed. "Remember that joint survivorship clause you both signed on acquisition?" he asked. "Yes." "Well, most people overlook it, but in California, it can grant you leverage in a dispute if you push it through the right legal filters. I can execute a transfer leveraging that clause, under the guise of asset protection. It'll raise eyebrows, but it'll be legal. Do it." He didn't ask why, didn't moralize, he simply got to work. While he handled the paperwork, I made myself a second cup of coffee and tried to pretend my world wasn't tilting. But I also began to reflect. How long had Richard planned this? Had he been plotting behind my back while we made love? While he kissed my forehead and told me I was his piece? Was the man I knew even real? I wandered through the mansion. Each room echoed a memory. The master bedroom where we toasted to our 5th anniversary. The home office where I'd found him crying once when he lost his first big case. The guest room where we almost adopted our niece when my sister got sick. And the kitchen. God, the kitchen, where we danced barefoot to jazz while making pasta on Sunday nights. What had I become in his story? A background character? A burden? By 3:45 p.m., David sent the final confirmation. Transfer complete. The Malibu property is now legally in your name, Julia. If he wants it, he'll have to take you to court. And trust me, that won't be easy. I stared at the message for a full minute. I'd done it. I had reclaimed something. Myself, my dignity, my place. I hadn't screamed, hadn't begged. I had acted. It felt powerful. At 6 p.m., I heard Richard's car pull into the driveway. I had changed into a soft gray dress, tied my hair back, and touched up my makeup. I wanted to look calm, serene, unshaken. He walked in, briefcase in one hand, a bottle of wine in the other. "Hey, babe," he said, kissing my cheek. "Dinner plans?" "Not yet," I replied sweetly. "How was your day?" He shrugged. "Same old. You know how it is. One of those long ones, liar. And you?" he asked. I smiled. "Oh, I had a very productive day." He raised an eyebrow but said nothing. We sat down to dinner like everything was normal. He poured the wine, complimented my cooking, told me a sanitized story about a court settlement. I nodded in the right places, and all the while, I waited. Waited for him to realize. Waited for the moment when he would check his firm's holding account or receive a notice from the county registrar. When he would understand that his quiet little exit plan had just been detonated by the woman he thought would never fight back. He had no idea. Not yet. But the game had begun, and I was no longer playing by his rules. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of fear, not even because of sadness, because of focus. Lying there beside him, in the same bed we'd shared for over a decade, I watched Richard sleep. Peaceful, oblivious, like he had nothing to hide. But I knew now that peace was a mask, a well-rehearsed illusion. Every breath he took seemed calculated. Every turn in bed, every sigh, every stretch of his fingers against the pillow. All of it made me wonder how much of him I had ever truly known. The man I married had ambition, yes, but I always believed deep down he had heart, compassion, loyalty. What a fool I had been. At 3:22 a.m., unable to bear the weight of silence, I slipped out of bed and walked down the hallway barefoot. Fapiro. House felt colder, emptier, as if it already knew a fracture had formed between its walls. I found myself in his home office, the room he kept locked most of the time, unless he wanted to show off something. But Richard was careless in his arrogance. He had left the cabinet unlocked. Inside were his files, bound in matte black folders with color-coded labels, corporate contracts, personal legal cases, arbitration documents. And there, tucked behind a stack, was a folder marked, Private, Do Not File. My heart quickened. I opened it. At first, the documents looked like basic investment summaries. But as I read deeper, I realized what I was holding: hidden accounts, shell companies, real estate deals under other names, and worst of all, cash movements offshore, to Panama, to Singapore, to Dubai. Some dated back 5 years. He had been siphoning money from our shared accounts, moving assets before even considering divorce. He had been planning this longer than I ever imagined. And he didn't think I'd notice? I stared at the numbers. Millions. Gone. He had created a backup life, a financial escape route, and had I never opened that folder in the car, I would have discovered it too late. The rage that welled up inside me wasn't loud. It was silent, slow, like a fire that starts under the floorboards. I took photos of every document with my phone, front to back. Then I placed them neatly where I found them. Let him think he was still in control. Let him think I was still asleep beside him. In the morning, I played the part. I made him breakfast, kissed his cheek, asked about his day. But behind my smile, I was already planning the next move. That evening, he poured himself a scotch, sat down on the patio. I joined him. I got a call from the registrar's office. "Today," he said casually. "Oh," I replied, pretending to scroll through my phone. "Apparently, there's been a change in property ownership on the Malibu house." I didn't respond. He turned to me. "Care to explain?" I looked up, met his eyes with calm. "I secured my position," I said. A silence fell, one that stretched like a wire pulled too tight. "You went through my car. You left a divorce petition with my name on it lying in the back seat. What did you think I would do?" His face darkened. "That was a draft," he lied. "No, Richard," I replied. "It was signed and filed. I'm not stupid." He stood, voice rising. "You had no right to—" "No," I cut in. "You had no right to hide it, to plan, behind my back, to try and erase me from my own life." He clenched his jaw. "Do you think transferring the house changes anything? You can't win." I stood too. "I'm not trying to win. I'm trying to survive. And you taught me how." He didn't respond, just walked away, scotch still in hand. That night, he didn't sleep in our bed. Something had shifted between us, something irreversible. But I wasn't done, because what I'd found in that office was just the beginning. The next morning he was gone. No note, no text, not even a fake excuse. His side of the bed was cold, untouched since the moment he walked out the night before. Good. That gave me time. I didn't waste a second. I called. "David, there's more," I told him. "He's been hiding money, setting up companies in other countries. I found files, offshore accounts, false names, millions missing." David was silent on the line. "How much do you have?" "Photos. Dozens, all taken from his personal files." He breathed out. "This is bigger than just a divorce now. He's committing financial fraud. And if the IRS catches wind—" "I don't care about the IRS. I care about protecting what's mine." David paused. "There's a way," he finally said. "But it's dangerous." "I'm listening. We can prepare a forensic audit, quietly. We get an independent specialist to go through all the financial records, including the ones you photographed. If the audit confirms fraud or hidden assets, we can take it to court and freeze everything before he can move a single cent. Do it. I'll call my guy." For the first time in years, I felt like I was finally stepping into my own life. Not the supporting character, not the silent partner, not the well-dressed wife smiling beside a man who owned the spotlight. I was the one writing the script now. Still, there was something haunting about the silence in the house. Every echo down. The hallway reminded me of the years I'd spent decorating each room, building a home I thought was safe. But now, even the walls felt like they were holding their breath, waiting for the storm we both knew was coming. That evening, Richard returned. He came in through the back entrance. Quietly. No greetings. No eye contact. He poured himself another scotch and sat in the living room staring at the blank television. I watched him from the hallway. I knew that look. He was calculating. "How long have you known?" he asked without turning. "About the divorce?" "A few days." "No," he said, finally meeting my gaze. "About the money." So he knew. I didn't flinch. Long enough. He chuckled dryly. "You never really understood the business, Julia. Don't pretend now." "That's where you're wrong," I said, walking into the room. "I understood more than you ever gave me credit for. While you were playing the genius in courtrooms, I was watching, listening, learning." He stood slowly. "And what now? You want revenge?" "No," I said. "I want the truth. I want the full picture. I want to see how far down this rabbit hole goes." He laughed, cruel and bitter. "You're not strong enough to play this game with me." I stepped forward, met him face to face. "I already am, and you know it." There was something chilling about standing so close to the man who once whispered love to me in the dark. Now he looked at me like an enemy, a threat. And maybe I was. Because for the first time, I wasn't playing defense. I was making moves. Later that night, I emailed the photos of the documents to David's contact. The forensic accountant, a woman named Miriam Lang, responded within an hour. She was impressed with the clarity, the thoroughness. She had seen men like Richard before, and she was ready to take him apart piece by piece. The audit would begin in 3 days. I went to bed alone, but I didn't feel lonely. I felt prepared. That week passed like a string pulled too tight. Richard barely spoke. He left in the mornings before I woke, returned late, and when we crossed paths, it was only with short, sharp glances. But the silence wasn't peace. It was tension. Like the walls themselves were bracing for impact. On my Thursday morning, the first results of the audit came in. Miriam called me personally. "You were right to be suspicious," she said. "So far, we've tracked at least 3 shell corporations tied to business accounts that Richard manages. All of them list dummy owners, but the signatures match his handwriting. And the transactions? They point to systematic laundering, from firm clients to private real estate purchases in Belize and Seychelles." My blood ran cold. "How much?" "More than 4 million, conservatively. But we're still digging." I sat down. 4 million. Hidden. Illegally. "And if I go to court with this?" "You'll win, hands down. But you won't just get a fair settlement. You'll destroy him. This isn't just about hiding money, it's a felony." I was quiet. Wanted justice, yes. But something inside me still ached. This wasn't just about property or bank accounts. It was about the man I once loved. The betrayal that had poisoned every memory. Was I ready to expose him fully? Was I ready to become the woman who didn't just fight back, but who won? "Yes," I said finally. "Proceed." I was in the garden, trimming the lavender bush by the side of the pool, when my phone buzzed. The sky was pale blue, and for a brief moment, I was pretending life was normal. That I wasn't standing in the center of a storm I had quietly started. That the man I once called my best friend hadn't tried to erase me, but the message on my phone shattered that illusion. "Julia, check the LA Tribune. Now." "David," my heart dropped. I opened the site, and there it was. Bold, unforgiving, high profile. "Attorney accused of financial misconduct. Offshore accounts linked to Richard Wayne." My breath caught in my throat. His photo, one we'd taken at a charity event 2 years ago, was plastered across the article. Smiling, confident, clueless. The article detailed the early findings from Miriam's audit. Of course, no names were attached to the source, but the details were unmistakable. It mentioned the Belize property, the fake companies, the quiet transfers that raised red flags in international compliance. And beneath it all, I felt one thing: vindication. I had known. I had seen the cracks. I just hadn't realized how deep they ran. That afternoon, Richard didn't come home. Instead, he called. "You leaked it," he said, his voice like ice. You had no right. I didn't leak anything, I replied, voice calm. But maybe someone else finally did the right thing. Do you know what this does to my firm? To my name? I know what you tried to do to mine. A long silence. Then quietly he said, You don't want to go to war with me. I almost laughed. I'm already at war, Richard. You just didn't. Notice when I picked up my sword. By evening, reporters had started calling. One left a note on our front gate. Another even managed to slip a card under the door. I didn't respond. Instead, I called David. Was it Miriam? No. She's not stupid, he replied. But someone talked. A clerk, maybe. Or someone in his firm who caught wind of it. Big fish like Richard make enemies. And now? Now he'll try to cover it, bury it, maybe even threaten you. He already has. David was quiet. Do you want to finish this, Julia? Really finish it? I thought of everything he had done. The lies, the manipulation, the fact that I had almost been erased without even a confrontation. Yes, I said. Then we take this to court. Publicly. We file a civil suit based on the audit. We show every account, every transfer. We let the system break him. I closed my eyes. It wasn't just revenge. It was truth. It was survival. The courthouse smelled like old wood and dusted books, like justice from another era trying to keep up with modern crimes. I sat beside David in the long hallway outside courtroom 4B. We were early. Richard hadn't arrived yet, but I knew he would. He wouldn't let the press have a field day without showing his perfectly sculpted face and $1,000 suit. He would come prepared, arrogant as always, pretending none of this affected him. Still, I couldn't ignore the nerves. My palms were cold, my breath uneven. David leaned toward me. This isn't just about the house anymore. You understand that, right? I nodded. We're asking for a formal investigation into his, business practices. If the court agrees, this becomes a criminal case. This will destroy his firm. I looked him in the eye. He destroyed our marriage. He tried to erase my life. I'm not here for revenge, David. I'm here to end the lies. He smiled slightly. Good. Because truth makes a better story than vengeance ever will. The doors opened. Our case was called. I walked in, shoulders back, spine straight, pretending not to feel every gaze on me. On the left bench sat 2 reporters. On the right, a young woman who looked like she worked for the state bar. And then he walked in. Richard Wayne, tailored gray suit, smooth hair, calm expression, but he looked thinner. And his eyes, they held something I hadn't seen before. Panic. He avoided my gaze. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. The hearing began with formalities, confirmation of identities, acknowledgement of existing divorce proceedings, and the presentation of new evidence. Then David stood and presented the audit. What followed was the slow clinical unraveling of Richard Wayne, each document displayed, each transaction explained, each deception made visible to the court, to the press, to anyone who had once thought he was untouchable. And I watched him sink lower into his chair. The judge's face changed tone as the presentation went on, from neutral to interested to visibly disturbed. When David finished, the judge spoke. These are serious allegations. If substantiated, Mr. Wayne could face criminal prosecution. Richard finally spoke. Your Honor, this is a personal attack orchestrated by a bitter spouse. These numbers are taken out of context. My firm manages millions. Mr. Wayne, the judge interrupted. This isn't about context. This is about concealment. Richard said nothing after that. The room was silent. The judge continued. I'm placing a temporary freeze on Mr. Wayne's business accounts pending further investigation. Additionally, I am granting Mrs. Wayne legal protection from any attempts at financial coercion or retaliation. This court will reconvene in 30 days with further evidence. I felt my breath release. It wasn't over, but the ground had shifted. Outside, reporters swarmed the exit. Julia, can you comment on the fraud allegations? Are you divorcing Richard because of the money? Will you testify if it goes to criminal court? I walked past them, head high. I didn't speak. Not yet. I didn't need to. The story was writing itself. That night, I sat on the balcony. The ocean roared in the distance, relentless and free. I thought about who I had been a month ago. The woman who trusted without question, who believed love was enough, who smiled through the silence and made excuses for distance. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone harder, but wiser, stronger, and the game was far from over. I checked my phone one last time before bed. One new message, from a name I didn't recognize. Julia, I saw the news. I need to talk to you. It's about Richard. And what he did to me, too. I stared at the screen. Another woman or something darker. Whatever it was, I wasn't alone anymore. And the truth was just beginning to unravel. The message stared back at me from my phone long after the sun had set. Julia, I saw the news. I need to talk to you. It's about Richard. And what he did to me, too. The number wasn't saved in my contacts. No name. No picture. Just those chilling words. At first, I thought it might be a trick. Maybe someone from Richard's team trying to bait me into making a mistake. But something about the tone, direct, urgent, unpolished, felt too raw to be manufactured. I typed a response. Who is this? The reply came less than a minute later. My name is Allison Grant. I used to work for Richard. We were involved. He ruined my life. Please. I think you deserve to know everything. My heart tightened. I sat on the edge of the bed, the phone cold in my hand. There had been whispers, of course, rumors at parties, long glances from women at fundraisers. But Richard had always brushed them off with that smug smile and smooth voice. And I, like a fool, had believed him. I stood, paced the room. Part of me didn't want to know. What good would it do now, when I'd already severed the cord that tied us? But another part, deeper, sharper, craved the truth. Not just about the money. About everything. I called her. She answered on the first ring. Hello? Her voice was quiet, nervous, younger than I expected. This is Julia. There was a silence. Then a sigh. Thank you for calling. Why now? Because I saw the article. I saw what you're doing. And I realized maybe he won't be able to silence me anymore. I sat down. Start from the beginning. She did. Allison had started working for Richard's firm as a paralegal 5 years ago. Bright, ambitious, freshly out of school. Richard took her under his wing, praised her talent, gave her more responsibility than her role should have allowed, and then, as she put it, he crossed the line. It began with late-night meetings, then private lunches, then a weekend trip for a client case that somehow didn't require any other staff. She was young, flattered, caught between admiration and fear, and before she knew it, she was in too deep. He promised he'd leave you, she said, her voice cracking. Said your marriage was dead, that you were cold, distant. He made me believe I was his future. I closed my eyes. The words stung, but they didn't surprise me. Then what happened? He kept me on the hook for a year, and when I finally told him I couldn't keep living like that, he fired me quietly. Told the office I'd violated confidentiality. Blacklisted me. I couldn't get another job. I lost everything. I breathed slowly. In. Out. You have proof? Yes, she said quickly. Emails, texts. I saved everything. I didn't know if I'd ever use it. I was too afraid. But now, if there's anything I can do to help take him down, I will. I paused. Her voice trembled on the other end of the line. She wasn't lying, at least not about what she had endured. But could I trust her? I want to see everything, I said. Every document, every message. I can meet you, she said. Tomorrow. I live in Silver Lake. There's a cafe on Sunset. Vera's. Noon? I'll be there. When I hung up, I stared into the dark. I should have felt vindicated, righteous. Instead, I felt exhausted. Every day peeled back a new layer of the man I had shared my life with, and every layer was darker than the last. Richard wasn't just a liar. He was a manipulator, a predator. And I had been one of many caught in his web. But not anymore. Now I had a weapon he wouldn't see coming. The next day, I arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early. I sat in the back, in a corner booth, facing the entrance. My hands were wrapped around a mug of tea I hadn't touched. The door opened a few times before I saw her. She looked like someone who had lived a few years too fast. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a rushed bun, and her coat hung loose on her shoulders. She had tired eyes, sharp, alert, but weary. She scanned the room, saw me, and walked over. "Julia?" she asked. "Yes." She sat, nervously, clutching a worn leather bag. "Thank you," she said, "for meeting me." "I don't want sympathy," I replied. "I want the truth." She nodded and pulled a folder from her bag. Thick, stuffed with printed pages, handwritten notes, photos. She pushed it across the table. "This is everything." I opened it and began to scan. The emails were damning, personal, emotional, manipulative. "You're the only one who understands me. Julia and I haven't shared a bed in months. Don't worry, she won't be a problem." Each message was a dagger. Some included legal documents she had prepared for him under the table. Others had his handwriting on them, notes he had made in the margins, personal instructions. And then, I saw it. A signed draft of a property transfer, from me to Richard, for the Malibu house. Dated 8 months ago, he had forged my signature. I stared at the page, the breath caught in my throat. "You didn't know about that?" she asked. I shook my head. "This is a felony," I whispered. "I know," she said. "That's why I came." I left the cafe with Allison's folder clutched to my chest like a bomb I was afraid might go off in my hands. Back in my car, I sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. My reflection in the rearview mirror didn't look like me. I looked like a woman who had lived 5 years and 5 days, but my mind was sharp, focused, controlled. He had forged my signature. He had tried to take everything before I even knew what was happening, and if I hadn't found those papers when I did. I picked up the phone. "David, we need to meet. Urgently." That afternoon, I spread everything out on his desk. The photos, the emails, the forged signature. David's expression shifted with every page he turned. "This changes everything," he muttered. "He forged a legal document. That's criminal. Add that to the fraud and the offshore accounts. He's going to jail, isn't he? If this goes to trial?" "Yes." I swallowed hard. "Do it." David looked up at me. "You sure? This won't be a clean process. The media will eat it up. Your name will be in every headline. So will hers." I nodded. "I don't care." He studied me for a moment. "You've changed, Julia." "No," I said. "I've just remembered who I am." That night, Richard showed up at the house unannounced. He let himself in like he still belonged there, like the keys in his pocket still meant something. I was in the living room. He walked in slowly, eyes unreadable. "We need to talk," he said. I didn't stand. "Then, talk." "I know about the article," he said. "The reporters, the court motion, the audit. I know it's you." I said nothing. "I want you to stop." A small laugh escaped me. "Stop?" I said. "You wanted a clean break. I gave you blood." His jaw clenched. "I made mistakes. Fine. But this is war. You started the war when you tried to erase me." He stepped forward. "You don't understand. I was protecting our legacy. I was managing risk. You were stealing, and lying, and cheating." He didn't deny it. Instead, he looked around the room. "I loved you," he said quietly. "Maybe I still do." I stood. "No, Richard. You loved power. You loved control. You loved the version of me that didn't ask questions. And when I started paying attention, you decided I was disposable. He looked older somehow, smaller. You'll regret this, he said. No, I replied. I'll recover from this. You won't. He left without another word. I locked the door behind him. The next morning, David filed a motion to freeze Richard's international assets and submitted the forged document into evidence. Within hours, our phones were flooded. News. Outlets, lawyers, threats. Allison called too. Are we safe? She asked. He'll try to scare us, I said, but no more than he already has. Then I paused. You did the right thing. She was quiet for a moment. Thank you, she said softly. For the first time in a long time, I felt something that wasn't rage or fear. I felt resolve. 1 week later, I was subpoenaed to appear before a financial oversight committee. David accompanied me. The room was sterile. White walls, bright lights, cameras on the corners. A panel of 4 sat before me. State officials, finance experts, ethics officers. They asked everything about Richard's companies, the shell accounts, the forged document, the emails, the mansion. I answered without blinking. Then they asked the hardest question. Why didn't you come forward sooner? I thought about it. Because I loved him, I said honestly. And I believed he loved me. Until I realized he only loved himself. They nodded. The hearing ended. But the story was only beginning. That night, I stood in front of the mirror, looked myself in the eyes. You survived, I whispered. And now, you lead. The envelope arrived mid-morning, thick and serious-looking, delivered by hand. A man in a gray suit with dead eyes handed it to me at the gate. No words. Just the weight of legal war inside folded paper. I opened it at the kitchen table. David arrived 10 minutes later, already having seen the headline. Richard Wayne sues estranged wife for defamation and property theft. He didn't even say hello, just walked straight to the counter, poured himself a coffee and began flipping through the stack of pages. Well, he muttered, he's not pulling punches anymore. The lawsuit claimed I had ruined Richard's career, fabricated financial accusations, and used unethical means to transfer the Malibu mansion to my name. In one sentence, I was painted as a gold-digging manipulator out for revenge. It was so carefully written it almost sounded believable, if you didn't know the truth. This isn't about winning, David said. It's about noise. He's trying to turn public opinion. That part was working. Within hours, the headlines spread. Richard Wayne breaks his silence, betrayed by the woman he loved. Allegations against Wayne may be fabricated, insiders say. They used photos of me smiling at gala events, cropped to look smug. Richard's side was polished, professional. In his exclusive interview, he wore a navy blue suit and a wounded expression. I loved Julia, he said, voice soft, almost trembling. This has been the most painful chapter of my life. I've always tried to protect my family. And now, I'm being torn apart by the person I trusted most. I watched the segment without flinching. I'd seen him practice that face before, in mirrors, before court hearings, before interviews. Richard could make a lie feel like a lullaby, but I wasn't falling asleep this time. We need to go public, I told David. On our terms. You're ready for that? Yes. If he wants a public war, I'll give him the truth, and I won't whisper it. 2 days later, we launched the website, therealtruthaboutRichardWayne.com. The homepage was simple and devastating. It opened with a message. Truth doesn't need polish. It just needs light. Then came the receipts. We uploaded every email, financial document, and photograph, scans of the offshore transfers, a timeline of his hidden shell companies, and the forged document with my signature falsely transferring the mansion to him, the one that proved criminal intent. Most powerful of all was Allison's testimony, a 5-minute video where she laid out everything, their relationship, the coercion, the lies, the threats, and the fallout. She didn't cry. She didn't Break. She spoke with the steady tone of someone who had survived, and it went viral. By the next morning, the world began to tilt. News sites picked up the story. Journalists asked for interviews. Public opinion started to shift. People began digging into Richard's past, rereading previous stories with new eyes. 2 former employees emailed David anonymously, with more documents. By noon, one headline read, "Is Richard Wayne the real victim or the architect of a lie?" Richard struck back. He filed an emergency injunction to take down the website and freeze all of my assets, including the Malibu mansion, my checking account, and the small investment portfolio I'd built with leftover funds. His team claimed I had used manipulated data to defame him, and that I had weaponized personal relationships to destabilize his firm. They painted me as dangerous, vengeful, unhinged. "He's trying to starve you out," David said after reading the injunction. "Classic abuser move, legal suffocation. Let him try," I said. The hearing was set for 3 days later. It was one of the most important days of my life, not because of what was at stake, but because of how I would stand in front of the system and refuse to be erased. I wore no designer brands that day, just a simple black blouse, dark trousers, and my hair tied back. No performance, just presence. Richard arrived in a charcoal gray suit, flanked by 2 attorneys and a PR representative whispering into his ear. When the judge entered the courtroom, the room fell into a tense hush. David opened. "Your Honor," he began, "we are not here to discuss emotion. We are here to discuss facts, documents, patterns, crimes." He presented the audit trail again, the signatures, the bank transfers, the offshore accounts. He showed the forged document with my name. He showed metadata, email timestamps, voice, memos, Allison's testimony, screenshots of internal messages from Richard's firm, proof that he had tried to silence whistleblowers. Richard's team countered with drama, that I had broken into his private files, that I had manipulated Allison with false promises, that I had hacked his email, as if I was some kind of rogue spy with a laptop. The judge listened carefully. Then, after 90 minutes, he spoke. Motion denied. Mrs. Wayne's actions are backed by credible documentation and verified audits. Mr. Wayne's request to freeze assets is not only unsupported, it is bordering on retaliatory. He paused, then added, "This court will not be used as a weapon." Richard didn't look at me. He clenched his jaw, packed his papers, and left. And I stood in the hallway, closed my eyes, and exhaled the weight of 100 sleepless nights. That evening, we received a package, no return address, just a manila envelope. Inside was a letter, typed, unsigned, and several pages of medical records. "He did the same thing to me," the letter read. 10 years ago. I was 19. He told me he loved me. I believed him. When I got pregnant, he disappeared. I lost everything. I never spoke. Until now. There were photos too. A different girl. Same pattern. Same Richard. I held the letter in my hands for a long time. Something broke inside me then. Not from pain, but from clarity. He was never the man I loved. He was a machine. A cold, brilliant manipulator who used love like a prop. But I wasn't a prop anymore. I was the story, and I was just getting started. It was a gray morning, the kind that cloaks the sky in silence. Rain fell in a slow, steady rhythm, tapping against the windows of the car as I sat parked outside the courthouse. I didn't rush. There was no more urgency, no more panic. Just the final step in a journey that had already transformed me. The final hearing. The end of the process that had begun the moment I opened that folder in Richard's car. And now, after months of revelations, betrayals, public exposure, and a personal war I never asked for, everything came down to this. Inside the courthouse, it was unusually still. The fluorescent lights hummed above me, and the floor beneath. My heels echoed with each step I took. I wore a navy blue coat, simple, clean, and carried nothing but my phone and my breath. David was already waiting by the bench outside courtroom 7B. He stood as I approached, nodding solemnly. He didn't ask how I was. He knew. This wasn't a moment for comfort. This was a moment for resolution. "You ready?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "Let's finish it." When we entered, I saw Richard already seated at his table. Alone. No press. No camera crews. No legal team this time. Just him in a charcoal suit that now seemed too large for his frame. He looked older, paler. The bags under his eyes had settled in like permanent guests. He didn't glance at me. The room filled, slowly, the clerk, the assistants, the court officer. The air was thick, not with tension anymore, but with finality. Like a door about to close behind us. Then the judge entered. Everyone stood. Everyone sat. This court is convened to deliver a final ruling on the matters of property, damages, and legal sanctions pertaining to case 8237W, Wayne versus Wayne. My name sounded strange, spoken aloud like that. It no longer felt like it belonged to both of us. It belonged to me now. Mine to carry, mine to redefine. The judge continued, speaking in measured, careful tones. His voice cut through the room like a pen etching truth into stone. He began by listing the facts. Verified financial misconduct through offshore transfers. Falsified legal documents, including forged signatures. Coercive behavior toward at least 2 known women, including employment-based manipulation. Retaliatory lawsuits lacking evidentiary support. Each line landed like a nail in a coffin Richard had built with his own hands. Then came the judgment. It is the ruling of this court that Mr. Richard Wayne shall forfeit all contested assets. To Mrs. Julia Wayne, including but not limited to the Malibu residence, joint accounts, investment portfolios, and residual corporate shares currently held in dispute. Further, the court refers the criminal components of this case, namely forgery and financial fraud, to the district attorney's office for review and potential prosecution. Silence. Even the rain had stopped. I didn't move. Richard didn't, either. His face was unreadable. But his hands, those confident hands that once built empires and closed million-dollar deals, were now clasped tightly, white-knuckled in his lap. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Wayne, you have the right to make a closing statement if you wish." I stood. I didn't look at Richard. "Not yet. My name is Julia Wayne," I began, my voice steady. "But for many years I forgot that I had a name of my own." I looked directly at the judge. I stood beside a man who made me believe I was lucky to be loved by him, that I was safest when silent, that questioning him meant betrayal. But the truth is, I betrayed myself for far too long. I turned slightly, facing the courtroom, facing him. Richard didn't break me. He revealed me. He showed me who I was underneath the smile, the dresses, the polite dinner parties. He reminded me that silence isn't strength. Truth is. I paused. Let the words breathe. To every woman who has ever been told she's imagining things, you're not. To every partner who feels small beside someone powerful, you are more than you've been led to believe. And to the girl I used to be, the one who whispered to herself at night, "Maybe this is just how love works. I see you now, and I'm sorry I didn't listen sooner." Finally, I turned to Richard. "I don't hate you," I said, "because hate would mean you still have power over me. But I hope one day you learn what love is. Real love. The kind that doesn't need to hide or silence or destroy." I sat down. The judge gave a single nod. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell. The sound was sharp, final. The sound of the gavel still echoed in my chest as I walked out of the courtroom. The world outside felt strangely new, like everything had shifted just slightly, the way it does after a long storm. The sun hadn't broken through yet, but the clouds were higher, thinner, and the air, for the first time in months, didn't press against my skin like a weight. David walked silently beside me until we reached the steps. "You did it," he finally said. "No," I replied with a small smile. "We did it." He nodded. "You know, not many people come out of something like this with their dignity intact. Because most people don't survive the first betrayal," I said. He looked at me with something like admiration in his eyes, then reached into his coat pocket and handed me an envelope. "What's this?" "Your share from the lawsuit. Legal. Closure. I'm off your payroll officially," he added with a grin. I held the envelope, but I didn't open it. The money didn't matter in that moment. What mattered was that I was walking away whole, not untouched, but whole. I returned to the house in Malibu that afternoon. For the first time, it felt truly mine. Not a battlefield, not a gilded cage, not a monument to a man who used beauty to hide cruelty. It was a blank canvas. I kicked off my shoes at the door and walked through each room slowly. The walls were still the same, the furniture untouched. But the silence inside wasn't empty anymore. It was peaceful. In the kitchen, I brewed a cup of tea and took it out to the patio. The ocean was calm. The breeze was soft. I pulled out a small notebook I hadn't touched in months and opened it to a fresh page. At the top, I wrote, "Things I want, just for me." I wrote, to start my own nonprofit, to travel to places that don't care who I was married to laugh again, really laugh, to build something that doesn't need to be hidden, to be alone without feeling lonely, to write my story before someone else tries to, and finally, to choose a life instead of surviving one. I closed the notebook and let the words settle inside me. A week later, I received a message from Allison. "Thank you, Julia, for fighting, for not letting him win." She said she was applying to law school again, that she felt like she could finally breathe. I told her I'd write her a recommendation myself. We weren't friends, not yet, maybe never, but we were survivors of the same storm, and there's a kind of silent sisterhood in that. Some nights, I still think about Richard, not with longing, not with hate, but with curiosity. I wonder if he looks at the ruins of his empire and sees the pattern now, if he understands what he lost, if he realizes that every lie he told wasn't just a weapon, it was a mirror. He shattered himself. I just picked up what was left and walked away. I no longer introduce myself as his ex-wife. That title belongs to a different life. Now I simply say, my name is Julia, and I built this life myself. Sometimes life doesn't break with noise. It breaks in silence, in a forgotten envelope, in a name printed on a page that was never meant to be seen, in a glance that suddenly feels unfamiliar. And that's exactly how it began for Julia, with the simple act of opening a car door, and unknowingly opening the gate of an invisible prison. But this isn't just a story about betrayal. This is a story about awakening. So many people go through life believing they are safe because they're accompanied, because they share a last name, a bed, a daily routine. But the truth is there are lonelinesses that live inside hugs. There are prisons made of promises. And there are loves that, when held up to the light, turn out to be contracts, silent, one-sided, and suffocating. Julia believed, like so many do, that love would justify everything, that her loyalty, silence, and support would be honored. She believed that behind the emotional distance there was strategy, that the man she stood beside, Richard, was simply busy, driven, and misunderstood. But the truth was darker. She wasn't his partner. She was part of the performance. And yet, she didn't break. She rebuilt. When Julia found those divorce papers, she could have cried quietly. She could have swallowed her heartbreak, as she'd done before. She could have begged for an explanation, tried to save the image of her marriage. But instead, she chose something far more powerful. She chose to act. That choice changed everything, because courage is not the absence of fear. It's the refusal to surrender to it. Julia didn't know what she would uncover: fraud, infidelity, forged documents, a web of manipulation. But she moved forward, because truth, even when it's painful, is always a path to freedom. Every step she took was a refusal to be erased. Every file she shared, every testimony she faced, every courtroom she entered, they were all stones in a path she was building back to herself. She could have stopped at revenge, but she didn't. She chose something higher. Dignity. She used the truth not to destroy but to reclaim, and that was her greatest victory. Perhaps what unsettles us most about stories like this one is how real they feel. How many Julias are living in silence right now? How many people sense the truth deep down but choose to look away? How many convince themselves that being chosen by someone powerful is worth being made small? How many stay because they were taught that survival equals success? This story reminds us, loneliness isn't the enemy, silence is, because there's a kind of loneliness that heals, the kind that comes after the final no, after the escape, after the realization that no one is coming to rescue you, because you are the one you've been waiting for. Julia's story doesn't end with a new romance. It doesn't end with a triumphant public speech or a revenge fantasy fulfilled. It ends with a woman sitting by the sea, writing down a list of things she wants, just for her. And that's enough. Because the greatest prize in life isn't a settlement, it's finding your voice again. If you've followed this story until now, maybe it's time to ask yourself, what envelope are you still afraid to open? What truth have you pushed to the back of your mind, hoping it would just disappear? Now might be the time to write your own list. The one Julia wrote on the patio of her reclaimed home. A list of dreams no one has permission to erase. A list of desires that don't require validation. A list of hopes that are finally, beautifully, yours. Maybe you'll start with, I want to be alone without being lonely. I want to feel peace when no one is watching. I want to stop shrinking myself to be loved. I want to build something that isn't built on fear. I want to tell the truth, even if my voice shakes. I want to live a life I chose, not one I tolerated, because healing is messy, but hiding is deadly, and rebuilding is slow. But pretending is a death in slow motion. Julia walked away with her head held high, not because she won a court case, but because she reclaimed her narrative. She looked the world in the eye and said, my name is Julia, and this life, I built it. With my own hands. She no longer belonged to anyone else's script. She became the author. And so can you. If this story touched you in any way, don't keep it to yourself. Share your voice in the comments below. Tell us, have you ever faced something like Julia did? Have you ever had to rebuild yourself after betrayal? Have you ever had to choose yourself even when it hurt? Your story matters, your voice matters. And someone else reading your comment today might be gathering the strength they need to take the first step tomorrow. Subscribe if you believe in real stories, the kind that empower, heal, and inspire. We tell the truths that others are afraid to speak, and we do it with honesty, emotion, and heart. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that they are not alone, that silence is not strength, and that starting over is not failure, it's power. Like this video if you felt even a single line speak to your soul, and above all, choose your story, own your voice, rewrite your life.